Welcome back to today's episode where I'm going to be jeopardizing potentially my day job. So today we're going to be talking about video games. And for folks that don't know, John and I wear many hats. We're both ADHD coaches, and we both practice as ADHD coaches. We obviously are podcasters, but then we both also have jobs in tech. And so my job is in the video games industry. I've been in that industry for the past 7 years or so. And so just to start off with a disclaimer, all of the things that we're going to be talking about today are my views and not the views of my employer. So guys, please don't be weird about it. In this internet age where like anybody can get doxxed and fired for nothing, please be cool. But we're going to be kind of diving into video games and how they impact neurodivergent people because, spoiler alert, they have a very outsized impact on both ADHD and autism. And we're going to be talking the good, the bad, and the ugly because with many things in life, there's a lot of nuance here, and there's a lot of good and a lot of bad. We're going to be covering all of it. So if you are a gamer or you know someone who's a gamer, and statistically I know that's true for everybody because so many people are gamers, this episode's for you.
Yeah, this is a little bit of I think an insider's look in a lot of ways. I think some of this is like how our ADHD and autism brains respond to games really uniquely. But also like because we work in adjacent industries, I'm a UX designer. You work in the games industry. We also have like an understanding of the mechanics of games, and so like beyond the psychology of it, like how they come together and what makes them. So this is going to be a really fascinating discussion.
Yeah. So before we begin, I just want to remind you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. It is not intended to replace professional medical care. We are not doctors. We don't claim to be. We are just a couple of nerds who find this information and this research really fascinating, and we want to discuss it, but please keep your medical decisions between you and your doctor and keep us out of it. All right, let's begin. It's literally my day job to understand a lot of this stuff. And spoiler alert as well, a lot of people that work in the gaming industry are neurodivergent. I've lost count. I think at this point I've convinced like between 10 and 15 coworkers to get diagnosed. I've always been correct. I have never been wrong. Everyone I have ever said, I think you have ADHD, has gone on to get formally diagnosed by a doctor. So put me in, coach. Maybe I should be diagnosing. No, I'm just kidding. There are a lot of neurodivergent people, both working in games and playing games. And so this is a very relevant topic for us on both ends.
So to kick us off, we've got some stats here. And this is interesting because the things that like I think are easy to read in pop culture, like it seems like there's a lot of boys are, and it's one of the things like ADHD is that's only boys are getting ADHD, boys get into games, but you found something a little bit differently, didn't you, in terms of like the gender divide?
Yeah, so the gender aspect is very interesting. So in terms of who is actually playing games, there's really not this vast gender gap that you typically see in pop culture. That's more of a result of marketing. It's marketed and historically has been marketed to boys. And the reason for this is way back when games first started, girls' toy aisles and boys' toy aisles were separate in stores. And so when Nintendo first came out with their consoles, they had to decide which aisle to put the consoles in. And so they picked boys, and the rest is kind of history. And I think now, ironically, Nintendo is one of the major gaming companies that I think does the best job of catering to all genders, whereas I think the marketing for other companies tends to skew a little bit more a lot bit more masculine. But that's how the problem originally started. It's nothing intrinsic about games that makes them less appealing to women. But in terms of the actual gender divide, about 45% of players are women and 55% are men, depending on the stats. If you include mobile gaming, women are actually bigger gamers than men. We don't always think of mobile games as real games, which I think is also a shame. I can't tell you how many women I know who are like, I'm not a gamer, but they play games on their phone every day, and like they'll own a Switch and they play every day. I can say, even though I work in the games industry, I don't know that I think of myself as a hardcore gamer, but I actually do play Mario Kart like almost every day. And I have several mobile games that I've pumped a ton of money into. And I think I have like a 7-year streak on one of them and stuff. Like I've had to log in, which kind of disgusts me when I think about it, but I've had to log in every day of my life for the past like 7 years. Um, so women game, just to kind of bash that misconception, but it's not created equal. Men are far more likely to have video game addictions. They have found that having ADHD and being male are two of the biggest risk factors for developing a video game addiction. But we'll get into game addiction a little bit later. Right now, let's just level set with some of the stats about the gaming industry. So a ton of people also game. 91% of children between the ages of 2 and 17 actively play video games. So all kids, pretty
Yeah.
much. And again, the gender divide on that one is interesting. 83% of teen girls, and I believe these stats are just for the US, and 97% of teen boys play video games. So it's again very much all genders and not just a boys thing. I think there's some variation in these stats globally, but that's more due to stable internet access, console access, like hardware access. There are certain countries where hardware has very high tariffs, and so it's very hard to get your hands on gaming hardware. And then if you couple that with limited bandwidth issues and trying to, if you don't have the hardware and you can't stream the game, then you can't play as much. So that's where you may see some differences in terms of countries, um, but yeah, the world games.
Yeah. That seems clear. I think it's interesting because it seems like the only gender divide has to do with marketing and how things are marketed to people, which I think is like the classic like boys like cars, girls like Barbie sort of thing. That has everything to do with marketing and nothing to do with anything else, right? We all know that like boys will play with dolls, and there's nothing wrong with that. And girls like cars and sports and games and all these things.
Well, and I
That
can say too, just my personal trajectory with gaming is I grew up playing Mario Kart and Super Monkey Ball, and actually those were very important mechanisms for me to self-regulate. And I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself on why people play games, but um, when I would have a severe RSD episode in high school, which happened a lot, right? There's a lot of rejection in high school. What I would do is I would just go in my basement and sit and play Mario Kart until I was so tired and so numb that I wasn't in pain anymore. And I think that games for me were a really nice sweet spot because they are so engaging, that it got my brain to refocus on something else because it takes all of your attention. Like if you think about Mario Kart, it's for folks that have never seen it, it's kind of like a cute racing game with the characters like Mario and Luigi and all the other, which I think most people are probably familiar with that IP.
yeah. Safe to
But
say at this point with the movie success last year and everything.
and the theme parks around the
Yeah,
world.
exactly.
They're pretty popular. But it's this one in particular is a racing game, and so it's like if you don't focus on it for even a couple of seconds, you're gonna crash, or someone's gonna throw a shell at you. It's gonna make you crash, right? So because you have to focus on it so actively, it was a very useful tool for me to funnel that like RSD, like that rejection energy into something else and just like rip my brain away from the ruminations and just that repetitive thinking of like the world is ending, everyone hates me, this is horrible. It's like, okay, just focus on the game. And so I think that was my childhood, but then because of the marketing, I really got out of it, out of gaming, particularly in like college, because I feel like when you're younger, Nintendo markets to you, but then when you get older, if you're not masculine, there's a marketing gap, and so it's like where do you go as an adult? And for a lot of people, that ends up being mobile games, which have unfortunately a lot more sort of abusive patterns that are kind of meant to separate you from your money. So the mobile gaming industry is a little bit more of a hotbed,
Well, and
which
also,
which is unfortunate.
yeah, and also I think a lot of those mobile games use certain hook like patterns in order to keep you engaged, keep you addicted, keep you scrolling. It's that like
They're called
never
gotcha
ending.
mechanics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
And it's
exactly.
not gotcha like, "Oh, gotcha." It's GACHA, which is from a Japanese word for like these like claw machines. And they like Japanese arcade games are called gotcha games, and that's how they keep you engaged. And so because it borrows a lot of those tactics, that's why those are called gotcha mechanics. So
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's interesting when you were talking about how you played Mario Kart and how it helps with RSD, right? I think a couple things that's fascinating there is, uh, one, I didn't realize you were so into Mario Kart. We've got to go. We got to like go head to head at some point. Like we've got to. I love that game. Um, maybe not as intense as you, but it's a lot of fun. Um, but I think it's a world that you can control, right? You've got some amount of control over it, whether it's like picking the character, whether it's designing the cart, whether it's like being focused on all that stuff, like you were saying. And then I think it's the other fascinating thing is when you find, because you were talking about RSD a little bit, we talked about this a lot in our RSD episode, which is RSD can be painful. It can be very disassociative. So when you find something that helps that soothes it, that heals it, it's a tool. It's a tool in your tool belt, right? And
right,
so it
and
can be
it's one of
helpful.
those things you have to sit and write it out. There's
Yeah,
like when you're in an episode, there's not much you can do.
yeah,
And so being able to, because literally the parts of your brain, you guys should listen to the full episode if you haven't already, if you want to understand this in a lot more depth. But basically, your prefrontal cortex has temporarily shut down, and you have to wait until it comes back online. And that's a very mechanical process of receptors unbinding to trigger that like prefrontal cortex coming back online. And so you literally just have to sit and wait. And so that's where games can help, or just anything, it doesn't have to be games, but something very engaging can help while you sort of ride the wave.
yeah. So when we think about how it's used as a tool, there can be good about like, the games can do some good things, right? They can bring people together. They can be really helpful. Um, but also there's like that like the other side, that the addictive side of it. And there's like a lot of there's been a number of video games that have a moral panic around them, right? I'm thinking like violent video games. I'm thinking about like Grand Theft Auto. I'm thinking about like a lot of those like warfare games. And I think it's fascinating because there are some games that have made it to like the um what is it like the tournament league status where people can actually like go into pro gaming. But some of the games on the adjacent side of that do have like there's a lot of toxicity. Sometimes people will like push others out if it's not like real gaming or the right gaming. And I think that's why you have like mobile games, right? It's like The people that are really hardcore gamers, like mobile games aren't real games, but it's that's like more of that gatekeeping, right? Where it's like I do the thing the hard way, and so the way you do it cannot possibly be the thing that I'm doing. Therefore, like it's gatekeeping. You're not doing it my way, so it's like you can't get in.
Yeah, I
Or we
think
don't want these
people
people.
very much get pushed out, particularly in online multiplayer games. So basically, for people that don't play any games at all, there are some games where you're online with a group of people, and you're able to talk live over voice chat. So it's almost like being in a 20-person group phone call while you play the game. And what happens is a lot of times people with more feminine voices do get harassed by people in what's called lobbies in those groups of games, and so there's even tools where there are like voice modulators to take your voice and make it sound masculine, because it's very hard to play those games without using your voice. You need to be able to coordinate with team members and say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
someone's coming. We need to prepare. Blah blah blah. I saw this." Like, it's a inherently a team activity, and that's the importance of those games as well, is because it is um it's a community. Because
Right.
I want to talk a minute about why people do play games, right? There's a strong community aspect to it. But of course, if you're going to be harassed because of the way your voice sounds, that's why there are tools that will change the way that your voice sounds so that you don't get harassed. And so that can definitely push, particularly women out of some of those gaming spaces, whereas mobile games tend to be by yourself, and so there's no one to sit there and like harass you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like gaming and video games is pretty accepted by culture now. I think a lot of people understand. A lot of people play games. I remember when I was a kid, a lot of people still didn't quite know what video games were, if they were good, if they were bad, and people would spend a lot of time sitting in front of them or behind them. And that's where you get some of that like moral panic around like them being dangerous. Um,
Well, and
but
just to do a little bit of myth busting there.
yeah,
There's very much a misconception that it causes violence, because there were a couple like smaller studies that seemed to indicate that. But what they ended up doing is they did a 10-year longitudinal study. So they followed people throughout 10 years, and it was released in 2021. And it confirmed that there's absolutely no link between playing video games as early as 10 years old and aggressive behavior later in life. So that's a very high quality study to show that it doesn't increase violent tendencies to play video games, even if you start young. And the American Psychiatric Association has done a meta-analysis in 2015 looking at a large group of studies, and again, they found no link between violent video games and aggression. So,
yeah,
just to address some of that moral panic, video games don't make you violent in the same way that video games don't cause ADHD, even though you will see those articles floating around every once in a while where it'll say, like, video games are the reason why we have short attention spans.
yeah. No, I think we don't have short attention spans, which is why we like video games.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. Why would someone with ADHD or autism be more likely to play video games? Because that's, you know, my God, I feel like we say this in nearly every episode at this point. Correlation does not equal causation. So just because you find more autistic and ADHD people playing games does not mean that the games caused the ADHD or the autism. So again, we do have some stats based on some surveys about why games are appealing to people. So 89% of gamers think that video games can bring together different types of people and create accessible experiences for people with different abilities. And so that's the fascinating thing to me about gaming culture, is that um, there's such a level of non-acceptance and sort of toxicity, and then in the same I industry, there is such a level of acceptance and
Yeah,
inclusion in a way that is profound. Uh,
yeah,
so video games are so nuanced, and so to tell you a little story from work, we were doing user research at one point about a new feature. And I was supposed to be interviewing this woman to get her thoughts on like some buttons, like some new buttons that we were adding. So we got very off topic. I was a terrible user researcher, but her story was so um compelling that I was like, I don't care to ask her about buttons. And she was telling me about how she has severe misophonia. And so misophonia, for folks that don't know, is you know how some people get agitated when they hear other people like chewing or noises like that? So that's misophonia. A lot of people have it. It's more common if you're neurodivergent. It's a common comorbidity. But there's degrees of severity, and it can be debilitating, like debilitating if you have a severe version. And so that's what she had, was a very severe version. And so she was explaining to me she um can't make friends in real life because there's too many triggering noises. Like she can't be outside in a social setting. Her only way to connect with other humans is through video games, because if she's hearing noises like chewing or things like that, she can mute them. Because when you're in a game, you generally have individual controls over other people's audio. Like if someone has a lot of feedback or is being loud or annoying, you can mute them for yourself. Um, and so she was able to control this disability. And so this is her only social outlet. And she played Overwatch, and she talked about how she does get harassed. She has had people threaten her and say horrible things to her because she's a woman playing Overwatch. But this is still, you know, Overwatch is her social life. And this was a number of years ago. I think about her probably once a week at work, because that's why I work in gaming. I don't build things for everyone. I build things for her, you know?
That's great. I mean, that's like it's awful that she was harassed. People are harassed in gaming, but it's sort of what makes you think of is the sense of control, right? When you have like sensory processing disorder, or whenever you're sensitive to external factors and you get triggered by different things, having to control your environment is so important. This is why, like, one of the most common accommodations for people with ADHD and autism in the workplace is just to be able to work from home sometimes, so you have control over your environment and over the things that could be very triggering or you could be sensitive about. But this community aspect is interesting to me, because the thing you hear in the news a lot is like the toxic parts of it, right? Which are obviously there, but that's true in every community, right? And the fact that it brings people together from all over the world, I think is a good thing. It sort of reminds me, it reminds me of a couple of things. One, it reminds me of our religion episode, right? We're talking about how like religion can both bring people together in community and create community, but it can also push people out for a lot of different ways, which just goes to show, like, you know, there's bad actors everywhere, and then there's like good and bad in all kinds of communities. And the other thing that makes me think of is like why we think games are good or bad, or like why some people are on the whole gatekeeping thing. Um, it's like the playing games is nothing new to the human race, right? It's nothing new to humans. Like we've always played games. We've like if you all sports, people will not argue if sports are good or bad. In football, you're smashing into another person, and it actually like does cause brain damage. But there's nobody
Well,
out
and
there.
that's
But
American football. And I will say
Yeah, American
in
football does
the
cause,
rest of
yeah,
the world, football,
right,
um, people are intense. Like I
right,
have been to some of the footy matches in the UK. I for our UK listeners, like I've been to Manchester United versus Man City. Those are wild games. Uh, so people always have this sort of intense tribalistic nature, I would
right,
say,
right.
because it gives a sense of belonging.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think my point there is that it's nothing unique to video games. And in fact, people can get hurt playing real life games in sports, but you don't see the same
Physically hurt.
level. Yeah, you don't see the same level of like, oh, it makes you aggressive, or oh, it makes you more of a violent person if you like football or basketball or whatever, or like the Olympics, right? These are things that like, and the Olympics is a good one because that's one that happens rarely, and it brings together the entire world over a shared interest. That and like the World Cup, right? The European football, like it brings people together. And I think there's always been this, and I've said a couple of times now, the moral panic around video games, just because it's a new technology. And you see this happening with new technologies where it's like television is bad, cable is bad, streaming video is bad, music is bad, video games are bad. All the any kind of new technology that pushes against the status quo is going to have people find all kinds of reasons why it is bad and creates all these other disorders. When in fact it's like about I mean, you could say something about playing solitaire or card games. They could be addictive. Gambling, we know, is addictive. Yet we have casinos.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the fact of the matter is they bring joy, right? Like, with those stats, 90% of people who play games say it brings them joy. 87% say it relieves stress. And so that's why people play. And obviously the structure of games also creates sort of a dopamine hit for particularly people with ADHD, but that also means it's almost a form of self-medication because games have a particular way of being engaging. The length of time of particular sessions mean that you can sort of throw yourself into it, hyperfixate, and focus deeply and get really good. And I think that this ability to get really good in a way that's compatible with your brain is part of the reason why so many neurodivergent people are so into gaming, because we are rejected in many social situations. So about 50% of autistic children report being bullied in school. That's well above the neurotypical average for traits that are outside of their control, right? For being autistic. But if you're really good at a game, a lot of these gaming communities are sort of merit-based. Like, people will want to play with you because you're good. It's something that's completely within your control. And it's also a situation where you're not having to read social cues beyond, because it's all voice-based, right? You're not having to read facial expressions. There's very little ambiguity. The rules are well defined, and it also gives you a conversational topic. You're not having to go out and come up with like, oh, I'm trying to make friends. What do we talk about? Well, you talk about the game, right? Like, you talk about the game. And so because it has that level of like structure, um, and it's like the right it's the perfect setting for neurodivergent people to be able to make friends when the real world tends to want to reject us for the way that we act and think and communicate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, how do you connect with others, right? Because even if you're good at your job, people are always like the other factor there. It's like you can't just talk about work all the time. It's
Right.
or when you're going out and meeting
Or
people,
you
there's
shouldn't.
yeah, right. But when you go out and or even trying to meet people, there's so much against you. So it's again, it's being able to control your environment. It's being able to have something to connect on and connect deeply on, which
A
goes
shared
into
interest,
right,
right?
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So beyond just the surface level benefits, there's also like actual therapeutic value based on some of these studies. So there was a small group. This is more of like a case study because it was only 8 participants. But what they did, and I believe this was in like 2024, so this is fairly recent. They took 8 autistic participants, split them into 2 groups, and they had them play Dungeons and Dragons for 6 weeks. So D&D is actually technically a board game, but you don't. There's a lot of elements of Dungeons and Dragons that are also true in video games as well. Um, John, do you want to take a stab at explaining Dungeons and Dragons to people that have never heard of it before?
Yeah, I mean, well, so it's a role-playing game, uh, and which involves world building. And so you basically have a quest, and the quest is designed by the dungeon master, who sets out some basic outlines and some basic rules for
And
what
the
it.
Dungeon Master, just to be clear, is just a person, like on your
Yeah,
team.
yeah, yeah, just a person
It's a
called the dungeon
very
master.
intimidating title for just one of
Yeah,
your friends.
yeah. All of yeah, a lot of my friends who were dungeon masters, like, or the ones that were the best were the ones that were like really into theater. They get really into character. But there's that whole character development side of it, because to play D&D, to start off, you've got to develop your character. And so you got to think about what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their powers are, their abilities, and the things they can do. And to get through the game, there's going to be different obstacles, and you have to roll dice to navigate through what kinds of things could happen, good or bad, to allow you to achieve your goal, get through your obstacles, finish your campaign, or what might hold you back. So there is an element of like randomness a little bit in terms of like what the outcome is. A lot of times based on chance, based on the outcomes of rolling the dice. But so much of D&D, what's interesting about this is it is that social aspect. It is like hanging out with people, and like a campaign. It's not trivial. You can't just like start a D&D campaign and then finish it in one sitting. Like they can go on for a long time. A long
So to
and
kind
part.
of give the one sentence summary, it's basically you and your friends are collectively and collaboratively writing a fantasy story together with some random elements thrown in and some rules thrown in about how it's going to work. But that's essentially what you're doing. You're writing a fantasy story.
Yeah, it's just
So
it's just like fantasy football, except instead of like football games, it's dice.
yeah. So they had this group play, and they then talked to them about the impact it had on some of the social challenges because they were all autistic. So what they found is that the structure of the rules helped to clarify expectations and social interactions, because these are like um long extended social interactions with a small group of people. Like again, it was once a week for 6 weeks, over the span of like 3 hours each session. So that can be a lot for a
Sounds
lot of
typical. Yeah,
autistic people.
that sounds typical. That's about right.
Right. And so what one of the participants said is, when you're interacting with people over D&D, you're more likely to understand what's going on. That's because the method you'll use to interact is written out. You can see what you're meant to do. There's an actual sort of reference sheet for some of the social interactions. And so they found that the structure of D&D sort of had therapeutic value in facilitating these social interactions. And another thing that they found is that players would use their characters to kind of explore traits and personalities that may be sort of dissimilar to their own, and test it out and see how it feels. Like, it gave them a safe space to almost act out other personas and experiment and see how it feels, test the waters, see what goes well, see what goes poorly, and almost like gather data points around social interactions for a group of people that tends to overthink social interactions, right? So what they said is, I can make a character quite different from how I interact with people in real life. And it helps you to put yourself in the other person's perspective, because you're technically entering a persona that is your character. You can try to then see how it feels to be in that interaction or in that scenario through another lens. And they found that these autistic participants had what's called bleed, or the ability to take on a new character that changes the way they feel about themselves outside of the game. So for example, if you are not very self-confident and you're a little bit more introverted, if you wrote a character that was very extroverted, high self-confidence, and you role play that for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, you might actually start to take on some of those positive characteristics of your character, because you're rehearsing it, you're practicing it. And so they basically think that Dungeons and Dragons is a valid therapeutic technique for helping autistic people.
That makes so much sense, and that tracks. It makes you think of Nathan Fielder in the rehearsal a little bit, right? Because you're able to rehearse behavior, you're able to rehearse conversation, you're able to get into character as somebody else. And the more you do that kind of thing, there's other studies too. I don't know anything that I could like quote, but there's other studies that like that show the more you practice or rehearse a behavior, the more it shows up or comes up in everyday life. And oftentimes, like, even in coaching, what we'll do is role playing. And it's by role playing that you get comfortable with the motions or the behaviors so that when a thing happens in real life, you can call upon that skill, that training, that experience, because you've already done it before. It makes it feel more comfortable, more achievable, and it can build confidence in a really powerful way outside of just the game environment, because you're
Yeah,
able to
and,
practice those things in.
role playing is also like a clinical therapeutic approach. Like role play therapy is a thing. And so what Dungeons and Dragons is doing is I think adding on an additional set of rules because, autistic people tend to do better with very well-defined rules, and D&D has a big thick book of rules.
Yeah.
There are a lot of rules. And so it's a very well-defined environment, and it has that sort of intrigue of generally being sort of fantasy themed. And so I think I know I get very uncomfortable with like role playing and stuff, but because there's sort of that fantasy element, I think it can um, take you out of your own body a little bit, and give you a setting where it feels appropriate to be silly or to be boisterous or like to just not think about it because that's what's being asked of you for the campaign. And so I think that it's very similar to like actual therapeutic role playing with that sort of added layer that might make some autistic people feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, it definitely it's not for everyone, but it does, I think, in a lot of ways, because there's like the lore, you can go deep on it, you can research it, you can hyper focus on it. There's a lot of things in there that I think
There's a lot to hyperfixate on.
yeah, there's a lot for people um, with ADHD uh, and autism to get really into. But there's also like other like similar things that I think are like adjacent to that are more casual. Like I got really into Magic the Gathering for a while for similar reasons and in similar ways. And Magic the Gathering is nice because it's a lot shorter, which helps with my short attention
Yeah.
span.
Just
Um,
to give you guys a sense of how much lore there is, they come out with new Dungeons and Dragons rule books every number of years. And what I'm seeing, I just did a quick search. The Player's Handbook, which is the basic set of rules, has 384 pages. The Dungeon Master's Guide also has 384, and the Monsters Manual has 384. And then they also have supplemental books that can have over 600 pages. So when we say there's a lot of lore to focus on, there's a lot of lore. And that's just what's put out officially by the company that makes it. There's a lot of also fan lore on top of it to engage with. So it's kind of an endless treasure trove if that's something that tickles your fancy for you to jump into.
Yeah. Clearly, it sounds like there is some benefit to games. It can be some benefit to playing games and how it affects neurodivergence, ADHD, and autism. Now, there are some games out there to treat ADHD. I've seen these. I've been targeted by some of them. I haven't played them though, so I'm curious how effective they are. You were poking around a little bit,
Yeah.
weren't you? Yeah. What'd you find?
I'm gonna guess if you were ad targeted by some of them, they probably weren't the legit ones because I was looking into some of the ones that have had FDA approval, and you can do a demo, but you can't actually play it without a prescription from a doctor.
Ah,
But there is actual merit to the ones that are designed intentionally. So there was a study that there was a meta-analysis that looked at hundreds of studies about using games for both the diagnosis and the treatment of ADHD, and they refer to these as serious games. So, serious video games are games that are designed with that intention for educational or health purposes, in contrast with what's called non-serious games, which are like regular or commercial video games that's just for entertainment.
I see. I see.
So,
Okay, so in
yeah.
this case, serious versus non-serious just means like there's a medical application for it versus like just for fun. This is not like the gatekeeping where people are saying that casual gamer is not a serious gamer.
That's right. Yeah. Like a serious game would have been designed with people who, have a background in psychology, for example. And I have seen some of those ads before where it'll say, like, if you play this game, it'll prevent dementia. That's medical games are probably not going to be advertising to you. So,
Yeah, I remember that a while ago, this was like a number of years ago, there were those like brain teaser type games that was like helps with your memory and helps prevent dementia and all of this. And I'm not sure how much the research backed a lot of those up. Some of them were just like, you know, doing the crossword kind of thing, which I think there is some evidence that engaging your brain in that kind of stuff does help, but to the degree
yeah.
that you need to that an app is going to single-handedly do it all for you is something I'm curious about.
That's right. Yeah. And I think to your point, it doesn't necessarily mean that games don't have an inherent benefit because as I was looking through a lot of the games that were in this meta-analysis, a lot of them are actually very similar, if not carbon copies of games that are actually on the market today. But the difference is that they have a lot more granular like measurements, and so they're trying to pick up and encourage particular behaviors and improve things like your impulsivity or inattention. And so they're designed with a little bit more intention. So those
Okay.
ads that you're seeing, I think usually are not going to have a study behind them, and so they may or may not be helpful, but there's no real research, and so they're kind of making these outsized claims in an ad just to get you to download it.
Yeah,
So
I see it. It's interesting. So it's like it kind of goes back to what we were saying about rehearsing a little bit, right? Where it's like by the repetition of it, by engaging in it frequently, that's what's going to help you build that muscle. It's not the same as just doing the crossword every week and saying that's going to help you with your memory skills or anything.
so I guess to talk about what some of those look like, first we'll talk about diagnostics because they can be used for both. Assisting with ADHD diagnosis as well as with actually improving some of the symptoms. And you would never, to be clear, you would never use these in isolation. So even if you had like a very ADHD score on one of these tests, there are other factors that matter. For example, having a childhood history, because it is possible to have ADHD symptoms pop up in adulthood, but that's not ADHD. That
Hmm.
can mean like a neurodegenerative disorder. And so that's why there's still value in the questionnaires about like your childhood history and stuff like that to make sure that it's to make a differential diagnosis and make sure it's not something else going on. But one of the ones that they used was a game called Running Raccoon, which is basically kind of a hybrid of Temple Run and like a 2D platformer. Like it's literally just a raccoon who's continuously running, and then you like hit the space bar to make it jump, or like you tap your phone to make it jump at the right time. And so they used this to assess the severity of inattention in ADHD patients. So the concept of using computerized tests to assess ADHD isn't anything new, but this one was novel because it's like actually a video game, whereas the other ones are more like tasks, which can be very boring for people getting assessed. So yeah, basically the raccoon is running and they have to make it jump across gaps. And unlike a normal game, because even though this is based off of games on the market, they are specifically recording the distance from the gap before you hit the space bar. So like how close was the raccoon before you hit the space bar? And this is a test for inattention in particular. And so the study showed that the number of times the avatar, like the raccoon, doesn't jump at all, so basically how often you would see it and then not hit the space bar in time, as well as the median and interquartile range of the jump distances. So basically how far away you were from the gap before you hit the spacebar did show a significant correlation with your inattention. And they also found that when the gaps are really close together, so if if it was like spacebar, 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 as opposed to spacebar, 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 if it was less than 2 seconds apart, the correlation went away. And what they think the reason for that is that if the jumping was like frequent, then the ADHD patients were like locked in, right? It was a little bit more engaging. But if they had to wait, then they would start to kind of like zone out and like lose focus. And so basically inattentive kids are going to hit the space bar later or not at all compared to neurotypical kids, but only if it's like a less engaging game. I found these results very interesting. It's making me question if I'm inattentive or not, just because when I try and play like platformer games, platformers are where you're jumping from one platform to another. For folks that aren't familiar with that terminology, I'm really bad because I hit the space bar too early, and then I fall into the gap. Like I'm too
Interesting.
impulsive when I'm playing those games. And I think it's interesting just because women tend to be, I would say, probably overdiagnosed with the inattentive flavor of ADHD, when many of us might actually be mixed or hyperactive. We just don't outwardly present the same way as like boys. And so, that made me kind of question like, oh, this might be an example of me being too impulsive because I hit the space bar way too early. But this has been my whole like even after meds, I'm still really bad at platformer games because I always
Yeah.
fall short ever so slightly and it like never gets better.
Well, that's what's interesting about this. It sounds like they're using your reaction speed, right? Like looking at
hmm
that as impulsivity. Like, do you jump too soon or too fast? But that's like a skill you gain as someone that plays video games, right? Um,
And I was really bummed by this because I was like, wow, we are chronically online and also are we slightly worse? That's a bummer.
yeah, yeah.
But
So how good is that at diagnosing ADHD? Did you
they
find?
found that it actually had a little bit higher accuracy than just the assessments by clinicians alone, because those questionnaires can include biases from parents.
Uh,
They can have biases from how well the clinician actually knows ADHD. Because as a reminder, most clinicians do not receive a single day of training on ADHD at any point in their education history, even though they're the ones that are diagnosing us. Like 93% of psychiatrists do not receive a single day of training. And I don't know that this is getting better. Anecdotally, I have a friend who's going for her master's right now in psych. And she asked if they were going to be doing any units on ADHD. And they said they might, depending on the teacher, briefly cover it as part of the childhood psychology unit.
of course, the
Um,
childhood aspect,
right.
right?
And it's so because of that huge gap in education, even people who claim to specialize in ADHD don't always understand it in the depth that they should. And so that's kind of the interest in these computerized tools. And the computer tests are called continuous performance tests. They've been around for a while, and a lot of them use what's called the go no go paradigm. And that's what makes this one, the raccoon test, a little different as well, because it's testing inattentiveness, whereas go no go is testing your impulse control. And so the paper on the raccoon game went into the history of some of these continuous performance tests, and there's a lot of them. But one of the ones that I found really interesting is that when they set it up with a Kinect, it was more accurate than a keyboard. So for folks that don't remember the old days of Xbox, the Kinect was like a camera that you would attach to your TV, kind of similar to a Wii as well. We had a
That's
similar
what I was
concept.
thinking of because I had the Nintendo Wii and I remember that it could like track
Yeah.
you in real time.
And so, yeah, basically the camera would track you in real time, and it would let you play games where, you, instead of using a controller, you could dance and it would like pick up your movements, or you could do whatever and it picks up your physical movements based on the camera. So that's what a Kinect is.
But it sounds like the games themselves probably and the technology itself is probably not enough to diagnose it on its own. It sounds like it's a
Well, they
supplement.
actually found that the Kinect is a more accurate computerized test than just the video games alone, because in these go no go tests, which are tracking impulsivity, basically it's trying to track, okay, you saw a signal, do you click the button? Or like it's like if a light is going to flash and you want to click it if it's red, but you don't want to click it if it's blue, how many times do you click on blue? How much can you control yourself? And so with just a keyboard, some ADHD people have that impulse, but they're able to stop themselves before clicking the key. Whereas with the Kinect, it can pick up the test they did was like raise your hand if you see the signal. And so they could pick up if you started to raise your hand, but then stopped halfway through, it would register that. So what they found is with like a computer test, when you go to click the button, you can go in for it, but then stop yourself with some number of people with ADHD. Whereas with the Connect, and of course, in that case, it wouldn't register because you didn't actually click the button. But with the Connect, what would happen is if in the test, they would ask you to raise your right hand if you saw the go signal. And so they would catch with the Connect when people would start to raise their hand and then stop before they like raised it all the
Interesting.
way. And so it's actually far more accurate because they can catch that start of the impulse in the process of you inhibiting it.
Fascinating. So it's the impulse, but there's something in there about like I'm hearing kind of like reaction time, or
Yeah.
maybe like processing time, right? How long it takes you to register, and then.
I don't know if they specifically looked at processing time. I think it was more like if you think of Simon Says,
Yeah.
it's more like that. Like how
Right.
often do
Right.
you
Right.
accidentally go for the false ones, but then stop yourself?
Yeah. Um. So
But
this
we
is
do know ADHD impacts reaction time, right? Like
yeah.
there are stats about how meds can decrease car crash rates because they tremendously increase your reaction speeds when you're driving. So there is certainly a connection there. I just don't know if that's exactly what they were looking for in the go no go
Right.
tests as
Right.
opposed to just
Okay.
pure impulsivity.
Okay. Got it. Um. This is interesting. It sounds like there's something to this, but like I can't help but wonder like how legitimate is this? Like other tests that are like this? There are other things that are in this like category.
Again, you would never want to just use those in isolation because
Right.
the patient history is relevant to make a differential diagnosis, like to make sure that you don't have a brain tumor or something like that that would cause these behaviors to pop up. With children in particular, ADHD can look a lot like trauma, and so that can like I don't know how much adults necessarily act like impulsively and stuff due to trauma, but certainly with
Sure.
children that's a thing. And so I think that the games are very useful in probably distinguishing that because with adults, we can say, hey, have you had these symptoms your whole life? Yeah, I've had it for 30 years or whatever. But like with a kid,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So
it's
like
harder.
it's a little more clear cut with adults, but with kids, because you have to look at you have to look at the developmental milestones, how they compare to their peers. It seems like it's a supplement more than anything.
Yeah. And there's another one that they specifically designed to be sort of foolproof, even for people who don't have this like depth of clinical background for diagnostics, because it's very challenging to get enough time with a doctor to get an accurate diagnosis, right? There's even confounding variables with some of these computerized games where, like if a kid goes in, I know I would have been super anxious taking these tests as a kid. So if a kid goes in and they're very anxious, you know how we do under pressure, right? Like we can lock in temporarily. And so some of these tests, sometimes kids will like lock in and do a lot better than they normally would because they're like nervous about like passing the test, even though it's a diagnosis. And so another effort at this was called Groundskeeper. And what they used were these, like, they're literally like physical cubes, like a Tamagotchi looking thing with like a screen on top. And when you touch them together, the like cubes can interact with each other. And so they made kind of like a whack-a-mole type game where a groundhog kept popping up and you had to do different things to try and like whack it back down. And so the creator describes it as a game that's just boring enough. So it's good enough to keep children engaged, but not so stimulating that it doesn't provide accurate measurements. Because when it's really stimulating, we lock in and we're actually pretty good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. So
so it's like this sweet spot.
if it's too much fun,
So
you're gonna want to keep playing it, right?
because then you're starting to get the dopamine hit. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
very much a sweet spot. So they said kids with
Wow.
ADHD can play games for hours because it's so engrossing. And that engrossing piece releases endorphins like dopamine and norepinephrine, which is actually a treatment for ADHD. So it's no wonder they can pay attention all day. You can't really see the facilities of behavior until we make it a game that's boring enough. So that's how the creator of this game described it. And an FDA monitored phase 1 clinical trial of it's a game by Cog Cubed showed that they are 15% more accurate than what is currently available on the market for diagnosing ADHD. And part of the beauty of the design is that it's very simplistic for people to apply, and it actually only takes a couple minutes to complete the assessment. And so people that don't have years and years and years of training, like their goal was actually to empower like schools, like teachers to be able to do sort of initial assessments or like people that don't have those higher degrees to be able to do like initial assessments and initial screenings because it's so simple to use and administer and it'll just like spit out a score. So
this is cool. I see where this is going now. And like just looking at the screenshot you attached here, it does look kind of fun. It looks like a fun game. But I get it. It's like if this can be used for diagnosing ADHD and it makes it easy enough and it's a supplement, then you can give it to people who are not as qualified or don't have as much training. I totally get
or
this.
even people who do have training but don't actually understand
Right.
ADHD.
Right. But that using it, like having teachers use it in school makes so much sense, right? Because in any diagnosis, they're going to look at, again, for kids, it's going to be evaluating against your peers and what the teacher says about how you're doing in school. And even for adults, it's like looking at like your childhood. So if teachers are already having to make these assessments, but they're teachers, they're not made to diagnose, right? Having this available to them, I can actually see can really help in making sure people get accurately diagnosed. And like on one hand, making sure their diagnosis is correct. On the other hand, like making sure they're not missing something, like missing kids, right?
Right. It's interesting because we sort of gatekeep diagnosis in a way, I think, where it's like, you're a teacher, you don't have training, you shouldn't be, or you're a parent, you don't have training, you shouldn't be, trying to diagnose your kid. But the fact is, you kind of do have to diagnose your kid to think that something is off enough to take them in to get diagnosis. It's not
Right.
like we are blanket screening every kid in the population. And so parents and teachers actually kind of do need to be able to sort of pre-diagnose to be able to seek out help.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what's interesting about that? What's interesting about that is like when we talk about diagnosis, there's a lot of risk involved, right? Because if you get it wrong, it can be harmful in a lot of ways. So you don't want to be too trivial about it. However, having a tool to put to your point, if you see something, you have to know what the next step is. You have to know
yeah.
when to intervene and what intervention looks like. Just thinking about like with my own kids, like going to the pediatrician and talking about like I have ADHD, very clearly have ADHD, so I wanted to not want to know what to look out for, and like I almost get like defensive or like worked up about it because as a kid, like going my whole life until an adult, not being diagnosed, there's a lot of things that looking back could have been a lot different. So I'm like extra protective because I want my kid to have a better childhood than what I had. Some what the pediatrician says is like, we'll just keep an eye on it. We'll just keep looking out for it, or like we'll check back later. And like, sure, that's fine. I get that. But it'd be cool to have like tools like this where it's like okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to like keep an eye on it? What does it mean to check back later? How do we really like, what do we do next? So having these kinds of tools to say, okay, we can actually try this assessment at some point could
Yeah.
be like, alleviate some stress for people, I think.
Yeah. And honestly, they're testing these assessments in very young kids, like 4 years old,
Wow.
and they're finding clinical relevance. So I think that's worthwhile
Yeah.
because the earlier you do intervention, whether that's medication or behavioral or a combination of both, the more when the brain is growing, the more it can have compounding effects into adulthood. Like they have shown that the earlier you treat ADHD, the less they're going to see symptoms in adulthood. So, I think kind of the waiting approach
Yeah.
can actually do disservice. And I think a lot of parents get very nervous because there are studies as well that show that medications can stunt growth in ADHD medications can stunt growth in kids. But there's it's important to remember there's a flip side as well, that when it goes untreated without medication, it might not have the same therapeutic effects on strengthening the connections in the brain, and they can be at higher risk for a lot of things that happen in childhood and risky behaviors and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well, and I think that's an important point, right? Like just to pull some personal anecdotes there. I think I'm really informed, right? Because like I've made this a passion of mine. So like my goal of like looking at, because I have ADHD and like my dad clearly does. I want to look out for it because I know, again, as a kid, like not knowing that, just like what the impact that it had on me. And it's not like I want to get my kids diagnosed to give them medication. It's like I want to know how to set them up for success. And I think to your point, the earlier you catch that, the earlier you can like start to enforce some skills. You can actually start like build in some of that muscle memory. That's why I think why later in life you see less of the the symptoms like being as being as like detrimental, because you build those skills early on. I think that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, which is why I get so like to the point I get upset about it, because it's like, sure, like I don't want to just wait. I want to be able to intervene. At the same time, like my whole parenting style is like informed by like being a gentle parent as somebody with ADHD and wanting to like create an environment that builds those skills. Medication is helpful for me as an adult, but I don't know that I would want to get my kids on medication until they have enough vocabulary to talk through how it is making them feel. Because I had to go through several different medications to find the kind of thing that works for me. And until you have the vocabulary to know like what it's doing to you, it can be tough to evaluate as an outsider. But the things you can do is build those skills and create that environment and like understand how to adapt to your learning style. The amount
Yeah,
of side
yeah.
effects I got, like not being able to sleep, the anxiety, some panic, right? And it just totally depends. Like I think you've talked about this before, Vyvanse, like sometimes there's like an anger element, right?
Yeah.
And so what the thing I would be evaluating for in a kid is just how are they experiencing the side effects? And do they have
Yeah.
the vocabulary to be able to advocate for themselves? Even if things are working well, can they
Yeah,
say,
totally.
are they able to like attribute, I can't sleep because of the medication. I'm
Yeah.
agitated because of the medication. So let's try something else. Because to me, it makes sense. We'll try this for a little while. I know the side effects, so it's easy for me to just like, oh, talk to my psychiatrist and switch to something else. It's not going to be that quick up for a kid.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah, and there's different meds. Like I know they do alpha agonists for kids as well, like non-stimulants.
Yeah.
So there's a whole, I think basically the TLDR is that there's a whole like arsenal of tools available, and whether that is some sort of medication, be it stimulant or non-stimulant or behavioral or whatever, definitely like the earlier you start, the better the outcome. I think that's been shown beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what about like while we're talking about treatment and medication, right? Like, if, what about some of the games as treatment tools? Right? We talked about a little about some like the serious and non-serious. Um, what did you find as you're poking around on Endeavor?
Yeah, so yeah, they did find that games are helpful beyond just diagnosis, and they can help with treatment. And there are a number of different games that have come out that attempt to do this, and most of them do seem to be promising. Now, they're never going to be like a full replacement for all other forms of treatment. They're never going to like replace meds or anything, but it can certainly be an adjunct thing. And the cool thing is that there are absolutely zero side effects. And so this is one of those things that would be safe to give your kid at a very, very young age, because there are no side effects, and it can improve some of those connections in the brain. And it's also going to have a higher compliance rate as well. So like Russell Barkley explains, video games provide external, continuous, 100% consequences for interacting with them, right? So it's already kind of like candy for that ADHD brain, and so you're going to get higher compliance rates, because treatment is only as good as how often you actually use it. And so even meds or behavioral interventions, if you don't use them regularly, they're not going to do much. So I did look into one of them in particular called Endeavor RX. That one's FDA authorized. It's supported by 5 clinical studies with over 600 children. And in one of those studies, Endeavor RX improved objective attention in children with ADHD by playing for 25 minutes per day, 5 days per week for 4 weeks. And then a more recent trial showed that if they go on and play for a second month, they can even see increased benefits. So I wasn't able to play the full game myself. It does look like you have to have a prescription. Like when you sign in, it asks for like the prescriber login info. But they do have a free demo that you can play on the Android store. I think they have it on Apple as well. And so I played the demo, and it was interesting. It was so basically the first part you're holding your phone, and it's tilt enabled, and so you're on like a continuously moving raft, and there's like targets in the water. And so you tilt your phone to make sure that the raft hits the targets. So that's step one. Step two, the raft is driving itself and it's steering itself, but now they have colored birds jumping out of the water. I don't know why it's like birds and rafts, and that part didn't make sense to me, but yeah, so it's colored birds. There's blue, yellow, and red birds, and they jump out of the water. And whenever you see a red bird jump out, you're supposed to tap the screen to catch the bird, but not on the blue or the yellow. And so that's where you start to get into that go, no go impulsivity that we talked about. So then after those first two phases, it kind of assesses where your skill level is at. And so then it custom creates the next phase based on your performance in the first two. And it combines the two aspects. So you are both steering the raft, and also you're supposed to tap the screen when it's a red bird. And so it's teaching that impulsivity inhibition by not tapping the screen when it's a different color bird. And it's also helping to teach the multitasking skill, because you also still have to focus on steering the raft at the same time. So it's kind of an interesting concept, and it does seem to show promise. And even if it's, a marginal improvement, the fact that there's no side effects whatsoever, I think is a really big deal, because, it's understandable that parents feel hesitant about various ADHD treatment options. And so this is one where you really don't have to feel that nervous. And it's also something that your kid probably wants to do anyway, because kids love games.
So this one's interesting to me for a lot of reasons, because I remember I actually like tried to use this one a while ago, but I got blocked by the you need a prescription, which I thought was so fascinating, right? Like a game, you need a prescription. So it's like hard for me not to be skeptical of it, because like
Yeah.
how does it work? But I guess if the audience is kids, right?
Yeah.
And it is building those skills, then I think what you wouldn't want to do is have a video game and give it to your kid and say this will fix your ADHD, and then leave it
Yeah.
there, right? You probably want to talk about it. You probably want to like have them play it and talk about it, and then reflect on what's working, and then use it I can see that being actually very important and powerful part of that as a treatment, is being able to discuss how you're using the skill, how the skill is coming up. That sort of like repetition and use of the skills and reinforcement of the skills is a lot more powerful than just like learning the skill on its
Yeah.
own, right? So
I
I can see
do
that.
wonder, fine line though, like if you make it sound too much like a treatment, would they then not want to do it?
Well, this is what I wonder about
Oh,
that, because again, like I think the important thing is if you can have if you do it the right way, having that discussion around on building that skill. Because I think what it sounds like this can do, and what this does in a really effective way, is I think it's hard to do is how do I give my kids the skills and help them build skills for managing ADHD symptoms when
yeah.
I myself can barely do it, right? Like it's challenging. Um, and so I could see this uh being helpful for that. Uh, but like anything, right? You want to reinforce it, and it needs positive reinforcement to work. If it feels too much like a treatment that the kids aren't doing it, I think like anything with ADHD, as long as it's novel, the novelty is what makes it stick. It's like I can have a million workflow hacks and templates and resources, and spend all of my time building all my Notion databases, and then like not touch it for 6 months. Because
Yeah.
once the novelty wears off, then you got to go to something else. But knowing that I've got a bag of tricks, a couple of things to rotate through, is actually kind of helpful. So I wonder if this as a treatment on its own is like it's effective until it isn't, right? Like anything, and then what do you
I
do?
think so. I think part of it is with ADHD, you have these fundamental challenges, right? You're a little bit more impulsive. You're a little bit less able to pay attention. You're a little bit more hyperactive. Like all these sort of building blocks that then lead to like a cascading effect of other things that you have to manage, right? And so I think the idea with these is not so much that it is giving you those sort of higher level management tools, but more that it's diminishing some of those core building blocks in the first place. So if you're slightly more able to pay attention or slightly less impulsive, slightly less hyperactive, then there's less to manage down the line and less to have to work around. So I think that's more the idea. Like it's not going to be a replacement for those more involved, personalized approaches. It's just trying to like tamp down those fundamentals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does, because like again, it's using the reward mechanism and positive reinforcement, and it's like what I like about it is it's playing to the unique strengths of ADHD, right? You're using these things to reinforce what's working instead of like trying to punish it or do something else, which I think is a really
Totally.
was a really cool thing. It's a really positive
Yeah, yeah.
thing.
And I do want to call out this is not the only example of video games being used to positively impact a particular condition. So, researchers have also demonstrated that survivors of car accidents have fewer PTSD symptoms if they play Tetris in the hospital within 6 hours of the crash. Because the game is visually demanding and it takes up your attention, it actually disrupts the process of memory consolidation. So that's where a memory basically goes into transfer from short-term to long-term memory. And because it disrupts that process of turning into long-term memory, it leads to fewer intrusive traumatic memories of the original traumatic event that happened. And they also found that, so it's like flashbacks, right? This is for PTSD. So it reduces the number of flashbacks that you're having. They also found that those intrusive memories or flashbacks went away significantly faster if you had played Tetris within 6 hours of the original incident.
That's so interesting. Tetris. Wow. I mean, like Tetris does have like one of the best soundtracks of that era of games. So I mean, like that could have something to do with it. But it makes me think about what you were saying about RST and
Mhm.
playing Mario Kart, right? It's like there is an event. The first thing I thought was like, who the heck wants to play Tetris? You just got in a car accident and you're telling me to go play Tetris? Like what? But then I
Well, and
thought
so
like,
the idea is that a lot of them sit in the hospital waiting rooms, waiting to be
yeah,
admitted, right? This was a US, or no, this was a UK based study. I was going to say our waiting times are long, but this is
yeah.
UK.
But
Their
no,
waiting time.
but exactly right. So like if you are in the waiting room or if you're in the
Yeah.
hospital with a lot of downtime, you're probably on your phone anyway. So
Yeah,
like
and so they literally tell you play Tetris
I
and it
could
will help.
see that. We're talking about PTSD here, which is obviously different than an ADHD diagnosis, but there's a lot of overlap between RSD
Yeah.
and a rejective sensitive dysphoria.
I think it's the level of engagement because Tetris, if you games require your full attention, right? If you zone out for even 5 seconds, you will die in the game, right? Like the with Tetris, the blocks will pile up, or like with Mario Kart, like we were saying, if you'll veer off the track and you'll lose. It requires constant attention, and then there's a constant reward mechanic because you can continuously see that you're doing well or not doing well and that you could do better. But
Yeah.
there's like a constant feedback loop and constant requirement of attention. And so I think because of that sort of fundamental aspect of these types of games, they are using that part of your brain. And so in cases of like traumatic situations where the brain is otherwise also trying to form memories, or with ADHD where the brain is kind of overreacting to a perceived sense of rejection, it's getting the same part of your brain to be forced to focus on something else, which then means it can't complete that maladaptive task. And so that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it can just sort of you're distracting the brain, like the brain is like, I'm on a mission, I'm gonna go form this like terrible memory, and you're like, hey buddy, did you see the shiny thing over there? And it goes, oh, what? And then it forgets, right? That's kind of to oversimplify it, that's kind of what's happening. And so I think this would likely be applicable to any other game that requires a similar level of engagement. Like I would say a narrative game where there's no timer function probably is not going to have the same effect. But like something that requires your constant attention, I think that's sort of the sweet spot.
Right. Well, you're engaging in activity that's going to prevent you from ruminating. I think that's
Yeah.
the thing, right? 'Cause I think one of the things that comes with trauma, with RSD, with ADHD, is like the inclination to ruminate on the activity, especially after it happens. So especially like, I mean, this happens like when you're having RSD in the workplace, like you get bad feedback, and it's like all of a sudden you're sitting there ruminating. And so it's like, that's why it's helpful to have these different things to go to, this bag of tricks, I think things to try. So that could be something worth, even anecdotally, right? Like next time you're going through RSD or like struggling through something, try Tetris. Like
Yeah.
that could be kind of cool.
So we've been talking about the good side of gaming. There's also a negative side that equally has to be discussed here. So both with ADHD and autism, you are at a higher risk of like a gaming disorder, gaming addiction. So gaming disorder is actually defined in the International Classification of Disease 11, ICD-11. So these are when you go to a therapist, they use diagnostic codes. Those are from the ICD-11. So it's defined as impaired control over gaming, increased priority given to gaming, and continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. So there's a little bit of nuance that I really want to call out here. It's so gaming or even logging a lot of hours gaming is not a problem in and of itself. As we talked about, this could be an important social outlet. It can
Mm-hmm.
have therapeutic effects, in fact. But when it's starting to have other consequences on your life, and this is, I think, similar to the definition of most forms of addiction, right? In the way that they're defined, moderation is fine as long as it's not negatively impacting your life, it's fine. But if it starts to take priority over other things, if you start to suffer consequences in terms of not being able to perform at work or in school, or like losing your social circles or disconnecting with family, things like that, that's when it starts to cross over into being like a maladaptive disorder type of a territory.
God, yeah. It sounds like addiction, right? Like gambling addiction, I think meets this whole criteria. It's interesting because with games, I could see because there is the dopamine, there's a reward mechanism, why people get so into it, especially video games. Um, and there's, especially with like a lot of fantasy games, like there's so much world building, all that lore. I could see why it pulls people in. But I think there's also the side of it, which is like there are a lot of like rules, especially if we're thinking about some video games, there's a lot of mechanics, even some like board games, there could be a lot of rules to follow and keep up with it. I could see it being hard with working memory for some people. So it's a trap I think doesn't necessarily like catch everyone. But like anything, it's if you are engaging with it a lot, it can pull you in. That's where that addiction can start to
Yeah.
like can really get in the way of
Well, and we'll
things.
we'll talk about this in a minute here too, but I think games have been like getting increasingly addictive because of particular mechanics like microtransactions, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So internet gaming disorder was also introduced in DSM-5 back in 2013, but it wasn't sufficiently understood at the time to be like a formal diagnosis. And so their criteria, a little different in ICD-11, is that you have to experience 5 or more of the following symptoms: preoccupation or obsession, withdrawal, tolerance, loss of control, loss of interest, continued overuse, deceiving, escape of negative feelings, and functional impairment. So again, this is actually quite similar
Well,
to like alcoholism, right?
yeah.
Or gambling addiction, which, by the way, people with ADHD are much higher risk of developing gambling addictions and alcoholism and all that stuff as well. And so it kind of fits in a similar way.
Yeah, it's that thing where we are more prone to addiction. And so anything that's
Yeah.
going to be novel and interesting and have that dopamine hit, that reward based mechanism, especially like you're saying, especially with the a lot of the apps and game mechanics that keep you pulled in, like how do you pull away? Which is why I think it's so fascinating that games are like they're both a source of addiction and also like a treatment in other ways, right? Getting that.
It's such a nuanced thing. That's why I wanted to talk about that nuance is because it's not about the raw hours that you're logging necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point it does. If if you're logging like 18 hours a day, then that might be. But like in most cases, it's not about the raw hours. It's more about how you're using it and the sort of side effects or outcomes because of the gaming and not the gaming itself. So, to kind of talk more about this addictive potential, there was a Canadian study that recruited 280 children between the ages of 4 and 12, and 98 of those children had ADHD. And another control group, interestingly, had other, I think they just defined it as like a clinical population, so other sort of like psychiatric disorders, but not ADHD. And they wanted to look at the connection between ADHD and childhood video game addiction. So they found that the overall ADHD group logged more play hours than the neurotypical group, and they found that the severity of your ADHD symptoms strongly correlated with video game addiction, with impulsivity being the strongest predictor. There was also a significant correlation between hyperactivity symptoms and specifically weekend usage time, which is kind of interesting. The results were highly gendered, with ADHD boys being at much higher risk of video game addiction than the girls in the group. So,
Yeah, I wonder if that gendered part of it, we've talked about this before, like some of that's marketing, right? But especially in studies, I wonder how much of that is like because the boys are given the games, again, maybe due to marketing, but like just culturally, it's more acceptable for boys to be playing video games. And so I wonder if that's what plays into that.
I don't know. It's hard to say with younger generations these days because like Nintendo, right? We talked about this earlier, was one of the ones that initially leaned into the marketing. This was after there was kind of a gaming bubble. You had Pong and the earlier games came out, and it was really novel and exciting. And then a lot of people started developing games, and you started to get a lot of like crappy games. And so Nintendo came out with their like seal of Nintendo approval. And this was kind of the late 80s, early 90s, to show that like this is going to be a quality game. And like they did make really good games, but they did some kind of basic marketing, and they were like, "Oh, it looks like boys play our games more." And so then they leaned really hard into it. But up until that point, a lot of games were not very explicitly gendered.
Yeah.
Everybody played Pong, right? Even some of the most popular games at the time, like Myst, that was made by the head of that company was a woman. There wasn't that gender component. So they to try to dig themselves out of this sort of gaming bubble that had burst, they tried to very specifically market to one particular demographic. Um, as opposed to like multi-purpose marketing is generally not as effective. People want to feel like a product, and this is kind of universally true, is made for them specifically as opposed to being something generically for everyone. And so they started using like box art, which is like the posters and stuff like that, with like women in bikinis and things like that. And they leaned into like the sort of masculinity of games. And the thing that fascinates me is Nintendo has very much moved away from that, but some of the other brands have not. Like you see these commercials and it's largely focused on shooters, and shooters do objectively attract more men than women. That's always been true. But a lot of other genres are not explicitly gendered. But when you see these ads for gaming, it's often shooters. That's what people think of as games, right? It's shooters.
Yeah, that's a good point. 'Cause I'm thinking about like the games I see ads for, and like I think why culturally we think about it in this gendered way, because you do see a lot of games for games like Assassin's Creed or like Call of Duty, right? Or a lot of these other ones where people are like like a lot of fighting games, but I never see ads for games like Animal Crossing, which is like Animal Crossing is a great game. It's calming.
I mean, during COVID, it was the most played game, I
Right.
want to say.
Right.
The Sims is more female than male players. I can't remember the exact ratio. One of the most popular games of all time.
I loved The Sims as a kid. Loved The Sims.
Interestingly, I don't know if there's research behind this, but anecdotally, I've heard that a lot of autistic people enjoy The Sims, particularly autistic women, because kind of I buy it because kind of like what we were talking about with D&D, you get to role play.
Yeah.
I think that there is like actual value to role-playing games for autistic individuals. So I think that's the appeal of The Sims, I think.
That makes a lot of sense.
But
What
that
is
it's one of the most popular games of all time, and it's majority women players.
Yeah. So speaking of like autism and video games, what's the connection between autism and video game addiction? We've been talking a lot about ADHD. So how does it show up with autism?
Yeah, so on the surface, this one had some really interesting nuance. So on the surface, yes, autism, you are also very high risk. Okay, I won't say very high risk. You are at a much higher risk compared to neurotypicals of developing video game addiction. It's still overall not like crazy high rates. You know, it's not like 90% of autistic individuals are addicted, but it is a higher rate of addiction, and it's definitely a risk factor. So studies have shown that autistic kids do spend a large amount of time playing video games, have difficulty stopping video game sessions, which could be, we have difficulty stopping most activities and transitioning. And so I think when you
Transitions.
pair that with the engaging nature of video games, that can be a very strong pull. And they're more likely to exhibit video game addiction or preoccupation. And they found 41.4% of autistic adolescents choose to spend most of their free time playing games, as compared to 18% of neurotypical kids. So definitely a difference in behavior there. But from a different study, this one is really interesting to me, was microtransactions and how they interplay with autism. So, for folks that are not in the depths of the gaming world, by the way, thank you so much for listening this far.
Yeah, no kidding.
But microtransactions are where you already own the game, but you pay for something additional in the game, like an item. And usually these will either improve your in-game performance, like better equipment or like a better defense, like a shield or something like that. Or something cosmetic, like a really cool outfit. Like in speaking of Call of Duty, they've done like actually, I don't even know if this was sold as a microtransaction or a DLC or what, but they've done like you can play as Seth Rogen in Call of Duty, right? They'll do stuff like that. So that'd be a cosmetic. So a real world example is like just to get away from the tech talk a little bit is like if you went to a restaurant that it had a set menu, if you ordered an optional wine pairing, you could think of that as like a microtransaction, right? Like you're already getting the main menu, you've already paid for it, but now you're paying for something on top of it as like an add-on. Now, if the restaurant brought you like a random glass of wine and most of those glasses were horrible and a small percentage could be super fancy, that's a loot box. So loot boxes are basically a form of microtransaction where you get a random item. So you're paying for something and you don't know what you're going to get. And there's a small chance of it being something highly, highly valuable.
Oh
But
no.
overall, most of the stuff you get out of it is going to not be particularly valuable. And so it has been aptly compared to gambling because it literally is a gamble. And studies have shown that psychologically, it is very similar to gambling. So microtransactions such as loot boxes increase the odds of problem gambling in adolescents from 3.7 to 6 times as much. Studies also show that 32% of children regret their online purchases, and 41% of them don't understand what they are purchasing. Adolescents who purchase loot boxes are at a 1.87 time higher risk of severe psychological distress, even if they are not one who otherwise has problem gambling symptoms. And then another thing, blind boxes, which are like loot boxes, but in real life for toys, they're very popular in Japan, are associated with an increased suicide risk in adolescents, and
Whoa.
gambling behaviors are also generally strongly linked with adolescent suicide. So these games with loot boxes in Australia are pretty heavily, well, they are legislated, which is more than other countries can say. In Australia,
Australia? Australia is so cool.
I know. Thank you, Australia, for taking this seriously. So games with loot boxes in Australia are automatically classified as mature, even if the other content is not otherwise mature. So it's a similar rating system like in movies. You have mature movies and stuff. So if you have a loot box, you're automatically deemed mature, which is good. And a lot of other countries are considering legislation, but the holdup is that it's not always legally considered gambling because you can't ever cash out. No matter what, you're putting money into the game and you're never going to get a physical good out of the game. You're just getting something digital. And so that's why a number of other countries don't necessarily deem it gambling because of that cash out component. But at a bare minimum, some countries do require that the games publish the odds that you'll get a particular reward from a loot box, which has been helpful. Like I have a game with a bunch of loot boxes in it, and they a number of years ago had to start publishing the odds, and you'd look at the item and it's like 0.2% chance of the thing you
Wow.
want. And you're like,
Okay.
"Oh, actually, I'm not going to spend $10 on that. That's crazy." And so at least the requirements add transparency. But if you think about kids who maybe don't have a super strong grasp on like percentages and statistics and odds, and maybe don't have the real world experience to understand that they're rarely going to fall into that like 1% chance,
They're not gonna, yeah,
can
they're
get into
not,
problems.
yeah, they're not gonna know.
Yeah.
So is this just loot boxes like in games, or is this like physical loot boxes too?
So the blind boxes were physical loot boxes, and those are associated with the increased suicide risk.
Wow. Because I I I used to get some of those loot boxes. Like, do you ever fall for that? Do you ever get into those?
Not so much. And there's a reason why.
What is it? What's the reason?
Autism. So a study in Australia with 1,178 participants found autistic characteristics are in fact positively associated with a slightly higher risk of gambling addiction, problematic gambling behaviors, and risky loot box use. But counter to their predictions, when you control for that, when you exclude autistic people who already have problem gambling behaviors, for everyone else who's autistic, autistic traits are associated with a small reduction in spending on loot boxes. So it's actually protective against loot box spending. So they have two hypotheses. Number one, the possible explanation could draw upon research that has happened around reasoning and decision making. So autistic people are less susceptible to what's called the framing effect, which is where decisions for neurotypicals are based more on the way in which you present information rather than the actual merit or value of the core idea. So basically, autistic people are a lot better at seeing through marketing bullshit and like getting to the core of what's actually being said as opposed to the way in which it has been framed. That's the framing effect.
So true. It's that high precision, right?
Yeah.
Very
Yeah, so
analytical.
we are far less susceptible to framing effect, and we also know autistic individuals tend to process information more deliberately and slowly rather than intuitively and quickly. And so theoretically, that more deliberative thinking style paired with that like buffer against framing effect might allow autistic gamers to like actually sit and consider the utility or worth of the microtransaction. And with like loot boxes in particular, more often than not, it might not actually feel like a value for their money, and so they might avoid impulsive purchasing.
That
Another
totally
theory
tracks.
yeah.
This is why I fall for it. It's the impulsivity. It's like surprises, presents.
What's the box?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I've definitely done that before where I'll have loot boxes for like characters that I want to unlock. And then I'm like, okay, Tara, you need to go and, cause you have the ADHD that's like, buy it. And then you have the autistic side that's like, excuse me, ma'am. And so then I have to go look at the odds. And then some of them I have honest to God looked at it and it's like 0.2% odds.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, don't be stupid. Don't do it. Another theory that they have is that autistic people have a stronger justice sensitivity. So that's also been shown in research. And loot boxes are broadly unpopular in the gaming community and are generally viewed as predatory for good reason. A lot of games will adjust their mechanics over time through enshittification, so it becomes functionally impossible to win without doing microtransactions. And a lot of gamers think that that's kind of messed up. Like if you paid for the game, you should be able to play the game without having to sort of incur these ongoing costs. Or like if you are going to do ongoing costs, just do a predictable like subscription model. Like there shouldn't be, because it's fair enough with some online games, there is an ongoing cost to these companies to be able to host the servers to run online games. Like, fair enough, maybe there should be a recurring cost, but make it a subscription model. Don't make it pay to win. So
Yeah.
very unpopular with gamers. Autistic people might be more effective at essentially boycotting loot boxes because of that justice sensitivity. The overall question, if you're asking why do games use microtransactions, if it harms customers, if it's unpopular, like, why do they do them? And the answer is because they do, at the end of the day, make a lot of money. So the overall value of like the video games industry globally, a massive industry. Microtransactions contribute $84 billion of that revenue. So it's not quite half of all money made on games is through these microtransactions. And so, kind of what we were saying earlier, games have gotten more addictive. Microtransactions are a newer thing. They weren't around, in in the earlier days of gaming. This is kind of a more modern evolution. And so gambling mechanics have been very much introduced into gaming, which I think makes them increasingly addictive to people.
Yeah, and it's bonkers. Like I get it from business perspective, right? You said something ago, right? If you got server fees to pay, you got to keep the lights on, and you got employees to pay. Like you gotta run your business, but it's bonkers how they are using these like addictive patterns to keep people engaged and to buy these things, and they're making so much freaking money off. It's all just for money. And the thing that's crazy to me about that is like where's the money going? Who is the money going to? Is it the employees? Like having great? Do game companies have great benefits? Like, are
No,
they hiring significantly? Like,
no. So in the software world, if you're a software engineer, game companies typically pay substantially less than an equivalent job. You have to be very smart to be a game developer. Like, there's a lot of math involved because if you think about it, you're recreating like physics and stuff. So there's a ton of math, and it's a challenging job with very, very long hours, very much date driven. And so it's notorious for mistreating employees for something called crunch, which is where developers will rush to get the game completed before a particular deadline. They'll even hire on a lot of vendors to do that work. And then once the game is completed, everybody gets laid off. And so, or like the vast majority of people get laid off, stuff like that. So it's actually notoriously a challenging market to work in, and there's sort of been an overall shift in the games industry right now. It's in a bit of trouble where a lot of the money goes to the top couple of games, like they're called like black hole games or like sinkhole games that a ton of people are playing, and then there's very little money left. So there's been in the last number of years this huge shift in the games industry because again, it makes unfathomable amounts of money. But a lot of that money only goes to the top couple of companies, and particularly, more the executives in those companies. It's certainly not going to game developers or artists or sound designers or like a lot of the people who are actually making the games. And then the people who go off on their own to make games, and they release it on Steam. Overwhelming majority of games that get released on Steam will not ever make even $1,000. So even if they put years and years of work into those games, and some of them are, there's a lot of crappy games out there, but there's also a lot of good games out there that don't make money either. So there's been sort of this consolidation of the games industry into a couple big players.
yeah, I'm trying to resist the urge, Tara, to go into a tangent about this and how like this corporate greed has completely destroyed creative economies. The thing you're describing in games, right, where it's like these companies make all this money for the top, and as a result, there's no room for independent developers or people to make actual art and sell things. The same thing is happening in the movie industry, right? Like this, all we ever get are superheroes. And I like Marvel, I like Disney, I like Pixar, I like those movies, but that's like all there is anymore. Where are all like the indie movies? And the same thing, like the music industry is a freaking nightmare right now, where it's like independent artists can't make money. Like there are no more like entry level music jobs, and artists can't make money on streaming revenue anymore, right? Like people put out their they make music, they put it out there, and because of the greed of like record labels and these platforms and everything else, but like there's no indie movies. And in games, you have these like massive franchises, again, that I think are fun, but like there's clearly room for more
Yeah.
in this economy. We're just sharing what we're learning. We're just
Yeah.
trying to combat misinformation, and we're trying to spread awareness and help you make more informed decisions and give you skills. So we're just trying to help.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with gaming, we've covered the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think the big
All of it.
takeaway here is that games are a tool, right? There's a lot of ones, they can do a lot of really good stuff and they can do a lot of really bad stuff. And so, I hope that in the future, we can use games to get really positive outcomes for neurodivergent individuals while also avoiding some of those traps that can harm the very same group of people who play games.
Yeah, like anything, there are benefits and there are risks. So it's important to know, to build awareness, right? It sort of goes along with like name it to tame it. If you know what to avoid, or if you know what to look out for, and if you know the benefits, then you can hopefully gravitate towards the side of games that are helpful, that are beneficial, and know what to look out for. But yeah, if you listen this far, thanks so much. Please consider liking, subscribing, and yeah, let us know in the comments what stood out to you. Like what games helped you cope, help you get through those hard times. What games do you think people should know about? What are the good games? What games should people play? What games do you think are helpful? And have you had any experience with Endeavor or any of those other like games that treat ADHD? Would love to know in the comments. Yeah,
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, catch you next episode.